Step closer to the light, friends, for the path ahead is carved from iron and shadow. The Wander-Wagon has reached the jagged heart of the Great Divide, carrying our brave travelers, Arthur, the sturdy protector, Ellie, the keeper of the map, and the children, Max and Lily, who are learning that the world is far larger than their dreams. And of course, there is Barley, their golden companion whose heart is as pure as the dawn and whose magical sneeze holds the power to heal the broken fragments of the sky. Today, they enter the canyon of lost sounds. In this place, the fourth shard of the Mother Star has become a magical sponge, soaking up every echo and every scream of the mountains until it has turned into a chaotic storm of noise. Here, your ears will lie to you, and your own voice can become your enemy. To find the truth, the Wheelers must find a harmony that words cannot express. Quiet now. Let us listen to the iron hum of the mountains. The Forgotten Constellations, the Iron Mountains, and the Keeper of Echo. Part 1. The Echo of the Star. The Wander-Wagon rattled as it climbed the steep, jagged spine of the Iron Mountains. Here, the world was made of dark, heavy ore and steep cliffs that seemed to lean over the road like curious giants. Even the air felt different, thick with the scent of wet metal and vibrating with a low, constant hum that Max could feel in the soles of his boots. "Listen to that," Arthur said, turning off the engine as they reached the entrance to a narrow, high-walled canyon. The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy. Every small movement, a shifting pebble, the click of a door handle, shattered that stillness, echoed a dozen times, bouncing off the iron-rich walls until it sounded like distant thunder. Ellie reached into the glove compartment and pulled out the velvet pouch. The 3 shards inside were glowing more intensely than ever. They weren't just pulsing. They were vibrating in perfect synchronization with the mountain's hum.
"They're reacting again,"
Ellie noted, her voice hushed.
"I've been watching them since the lighthouse. It's like these shards are magical sponges. In the garden, the shards soaked up the heat of the earth. In the lake, it absorbed the freezing silence of the depths. Now this one..."
She looked up at the towering cliffs.
"It's soaking up the echo of the canyon. It's becoming overloaded with every sound these mountains have ever heard."
"So it's not just a star anymore," Max said, leaning over his mother's shoulder. "It's like a living recording of the world."
"Exactly,"
Ellie replied.
"And if it's trapped in a place this loud, the pressure must be unbearable."
They stepped out into the throat of the mountains. As they walked deeper into the canyon, they saw a massive, gray shape slumped against the far wall. At first, it looked like a pile of boulders, but as they drew closer, they realized it was a person, or rather, a giant. His skin was the color of weathered slate, and his beard was made of hanging lichen and iron filings. This was Orin, the Keeper of Echo. He didn't move as they approached. His mouth was open as if to speak, but no sound came out. His eyes were wide and filled with a profound, stony sadness. "Master Orin," Arthur called out. The name Orin echoed through the canyon. Orin, 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 until it became a distorted, metallic screech. Orin pointed a massive, trembling finger toward the center of the canyon. There, suspended between 2 leaning peaks, was a swirling vortex of shimmering air. It looked like a localized storm, but instead of rain and wind, it was made of noise. Fragments of birdsong, the roar of ancient rockslides, and the whispers of travelers were all trapped in a chaotic, spinning sphere. In the center of that vortex, pulsing with a frantic violet light, sat the 4th shard. Orin leaned down, his voice a dry, rasping struggle. "It took it," he managed to wheeze. "The star fell into the throat. It was so empty, so lonely. It began to pull, It pulled the sound from the wind. It pulled the music from the stones. And then it pulled the song from my throat. Without Orin's song, the canyon was beginning to fail. Max looked up and gasped. Massive boulders, which should have been floating peacefully in the mountain's strange gravity, were beginning to shudder. Dust was raining down from the peaks.
If the shard doesn't stop,
Ellie whispered, watching the violet vortex grow,
it will swallow every sound in the world until the mountains themselves collapse into the silence.
Barley stood at the front of the group, his ears flattened against his head. He didn't like the noise. It was dirty and sharp. He let out a low, warning growl. Grrr, huff, as a stray echo of a scream spun out of the vortex and whipped past them. The fourth shard wasn't being mean. It was drowning in a sea of sound, and it was taking the whole canyon down with it. The Forgotten Constellations, the Iron Mountains, and the Keeper of Echo. Part 2. The Bridge of Truth. To reach the pulsing violet vortex, the Wheelers had to cross the Great Chasm, a split in the earth so deep that the bottom was lost in a purple haze of metallic dust. There was no stone bridge, no wooden planks, and no ropes. High above the abyss, the iron-rich air shimmered with a strange, translucent energy. The path is not made of rock, Orin whispered, his voice sounding like two tectonic plates grinding together. It is the bridge of sincerity. Only a sound that is true can give it form. If you speak, and your heart does not mean the words, the air will remain as thin as smoke. Arthur took the first step. He looked across the gap and called out, "I am Arthur Wheeler, and I will protect my family." As the sound of his voice hit the shimmering air, a translucent, crystalline step formed beneath his boot. It hummed with a deep, resonant bass note. Hum. It felt solid, like glass made of music.
"It works,"
Lily chirped.
"I am Lily, and I'm not afraid."
Another step flickered into existence.
Ping!
It was higher in pitch, delicate but firm. One by one, the family began to move across the chasm, their voices creating a melodic staircase that stretched toward the floating peak where the fourth shard shrieked in its violet cage. But as they reached the halfway point, the vortex above noticed them. The fourth shard, overloaded and panicked by the influx of new sounds, began to fight back. It didn't launch stones or fire. It launched echoes. It reached into the bridge of sincerity and began to twist the vibrations. Suddenly, the air around the family began to distort. The sounds they made were snatched away and thrown back at them, but they were no longer their own. "We're doing great, Max!" Arthur shouted, trying to encourage his son. But by the time the sound reached Max's ears, the shard had warped it. What Max heard was Arthur's voice, cold and mocking. "You're a burden, Max. You're just a child playing captain." Max flinched, his foot slipping on the crystalline path. The step beneath him turned cloudy and soft.
"What? Dad, why would you say that?"
"I didn't say that," Arthur replied. But to Ellie, Arthur's voice sounded like a bitter complaint. "I wish we had never left home. This is all your fault, Ellie."
"My fault?"
Ellie gasped, her heart stinging.
"I'm the one holding the map. I'm the one trying to keep us together."
But to Arthur, Ellie's voice sounded like a sharp laugh.
"You're not a hero, Arthur. You're just a carpenter lost in the woods."
The bridge began to moan. The clear musical notes were being replaced by a discordant, screeching static. The crystalline steps beneath their feet started to crack and dissolve into gray mist. The shard was using the overload property that Ellie had noticed earlier. It was absorbing their voices and reflecting them back as a sound lie, turning their hidden insecurities into auditory weapons. "Stop it!" Max yelled, his eyes stinging. "I know what I heard." "No, you don't!" Lily cried, her own step wobbling as she heard a distorted version of her brother telling her to go away. The family stood huddled on a shrinking island of sound in the middle of the abyss. The more they argued, the faster the bridge vanished. The violet vortex above grew larger, spinning with the fury of 1,000 misinterpreted words. The sound lie was so thick that they couldn't even see each other's faces clearly anymore. The air was vibrating with the force of their anger and confusion. "It's a trap!" Ellie tried to scream, but the shard turned her warning into a shriek of rage. They were falling. The bridge had almost entirely turned back into thin air. Max looked down into the purple depths of the chasm and felt a surge of pure terror. They couldn't speak because their words were being hijacked. They couldn't move because the path was gone. Then, from the center of the crumbling bridge, came a sound that the shard couldn't twist. "Awoo-whip!" Barley had sat down on the last solid tile of the bridge. He tilted his head back, his golden fur standing on end, and let out a long, soulful howl. It wasn't a word. It wasn't a command. It was a pure, raw vibration of loyalty and love. The shard tried to warp the sound. It tried to turn the howl into a snarl or a whimper, but it failed. A dog's heart doesn't use grammar. It doesn't have hidden meanings or insecurities. The howl was a constant. It was a single, honest frequency that remained identical from the moment it left Barley's throat to the moment it hit the iron walls of the canyon. The violet vortex shuddered. The discordant static in the air began to smooth out. "Oh!" Barley continued, his golden collar glowing with a fierce, steady light. Max looked at Barley, then at his father. He saw Arthur's mouth moving, and though the sound was still slightly distorted, he saw the look of absolute terror and love in his father's eyes. Max realized the truth. The ears could be fooled, but the heart knew the rhythm of his family. "Don't listen to the words," Max shouted, his voice finally cutting through the fog. "Listen to the tone! Listen to the music of it!" Max reached out and grabbed his father's hand. He didn't say anything. He just squeezed. Arthur squeezed back. Then they reached for Ellie and Lily. They formed a human chain anchored by Barley's unwavering howl. As they stood together in silence, refusing to feed the shard any more words for it to twist, the bridge began to solidify once more. It wasn't a staircase of separate notes anymore. It was a solid, glowing road of golden light, vibrating with the honest resonance of Barley's voice. The sound lie had been defeated by a simple, wordless truth. They began to move again, not as individuals chasing their own echoes, but as a single unit. Above them, the violet vortex pulsed one last time, a desperate, frantic beat, as the wheelers stepped onto the floating peak of the sound tower. They were at the heart of the storm. The fourth shard was inches away, buried deep within a shrieking cocoon of captured cries, waiting for someone to finally clear the air. The Forgotten Constellations, The Iron Mountains, and the Keeper of Echo. Part 3. The Harmonized Note. The peak of the sound tower was a jagged needle of black iron that pierced the very center of the violet storm. Up close, the noise was physical. It felt like thousands of needles pricking at the skin, a frantic, jagged vibration of every rockslide, every scream, and every whisper the shard had ever consumed. The fourth shard sat in the center of its glowing cage, spinning so fast it had become a blur of violet light. It wasn't just a star anymore. It was a trapped heart, terrified by the chaos it had created. "It's shaking the whole mountain," Max yelled, his hands clamped over his ears. He could feel the iron peak beneath his boots beginning to crack. The heavy boulders that floated around the canyon were tilting, ready to plummet into the abyss. Ellie looked at the shard. She saw the way it shivered, reacting to the slightest sound. It was like a wounded animal backed into a corner, lashing out at anything that moved.
It can't breathe, she realized. It's buried under a mountain of lies and echoes. We have to clear the air, or it's going to shatter.
She reached for the crystal flask they had received from Mira at the Lake of Mirrors. The mirror water inside sloshed gently, glowing with a steady silver clarity. Ellie knew that this was the moment the water of truth was meant for. It wasn't just for the eyes. It was for the soul of the world.
Everyone, hold on to Barley,
Ellie commanded.
Don't say a word, just think of the truth.
Arthur, Max, and Lily huddled around the golden dog, placing their hands on his warm fur. Barley sat like a statue of gold, his eyes fixed on the violet vortex. Ellie uncorked the flask. She didn't pour the water, she flicked it into the air, scattering the droplets into the shrieking wind of the vortex. As the mirror water touched the chaotic vibrations, a miracle of physics and magic occurred. Each droplet acted as a perfect acoustic filter. Where the silver water touched the air, the sound lies instantly evaporated. The distorted screams turned back into soft breezes. The hateful echoes turned back into the gentle rustle of leaves. The air didn't become silent, but it became clean. The violet vortex slowed its spinning. The jagged, needle-like vibrations smoothed out into long, elegant waves of violet light. For the first time, the shard could see the truth of the world around it through the silver mist of the water. It saw that it wasn't alone. It saw the 4 humans and the dog, their hearts beating in a steady, honest rhythm. The shard began to calm down. The violet glow shifted to a warm, deep amethyst. The heavy pressure that had been crushing the canyon began to lift.
Now, Barley, Max whispered, give it the final note.
Barley took a deep, deep breath. His golden collar didn't just pulse. It blazed with the intensity of 1,000 hearth fires. He looked at the amethyst shard and gave a mighty, resonant sneeze.
Achoo!
The honey-colored sparks didn't fly in a random cloud this time. They moved like a golden wave, a perfect harmonic frequency that hit the shard with a sound like a cathedral bell. G-O-N-G. The impact of the sparks didn't break the shard. It harmonized it. The violet light of the star and the golden sparks of the dog merged into a single, beautiful melody. The sound tower let out one final, deep resonance that echoed through the entire mountain range. Suddenly, the vortex vanished. The air was filled with a sound so pure it brought tears to Arthur's eyes. It was the song of the mountains, the ancient music that Orin had lost. The stolen voices flew back to their owners. In the distance, they heard Orin's voice return, a deep, booming baritone that vibrated with joy. The shard, now quiet and warm, floated gently toward Ellie. It didn't shriek or vibrate with static anymore. It felt like a smooth, heavy jewel. Ellie carefully placed it into the velvet pouch with the others. The 4 shards began to sing together in a soft, low chorus inside the bag. High above the iron mountains, the dark clouds tore apart. A new constellation sparked into existence, its stars connecting to form the shape of a lyre, the celestial harp. The music of the stars finally reached the earth, and the floating boulders of the canyon settled into their proper, peaceful positions. Orin climbed up to the peak, his stony face cracked with a massive smile. "You have returned the music to the stone," he boomed, his voice now a beautiful, controlled thunder. "The iron in my heart is light once more." He reached into the rock beneath his feet and pulled out a long, slender tool made of dark, resonant iron. He handed it to Max. It was the iron tuning fork. "When the path is hidden in darkness, strike this against your heart," Orin said. "Its sound will never lie. It will lead you to the end of your journey." As the Wander-Wagon began to roll out of the canyon, the road ahead was illuminated by the light of 4 constellations. But the golden line on the map was pointing further than ever, to the very edge of the world, where the 5th and final shard waited in the absolute shadow. Max looked at the tuning fork in his hand, then at Barley, who was already snoring softly on his rug. They had the water of truth and the sound of harmony. They were ready for the final piece of the sky. The storm of echoes has finally faded, replaced by the pure, ringing note of the lyre constellation now gracing the heavens. The 4th shard rests safely in Arthur's pouch, silenced and comforted at last. Through the mist of the Iron Mountains, the Wheelers have learned that when the world tries to drown us in noise and lies, the only compass that never falters is the honest beat of a loyal heart. They carry with them the iron tuning fork, a gift from Orin that will soon be their only guide. For the map is drawing its final line. It points toward the very edge of the world, where the light ends and the absolute shadow begins. There, the 5th shard awaits, and the true face of the darkness will finally be revealed. But for tonight, the music of the stars is enough. Sleep well, travelers, and may your own heart always ring true. Good night.